Greetings viewers, EricTheCarGuy here. Back again with another live stream for you that I hope is going off okay, because there's sort of a delay between what comes out here and what goes out there. Anyway, why don't we start with a few of the basics. And that would be, I will be taking the questions. So first of all, the basics are, I'm EricTheCarGuy. I have this show on YouTube.
Greetings viewers,
and
EricTheCarGuy here. Back again with another
this is not supposed to be happening.
That I hope is going off.
There. Sorry about that. I'm trying to dial this whole process in, and it's a whole new setup. I used to do these on Google Plus, and I'm still getting used to things, and apologize for that. But anywho, let's get back to this. I'm EricTheCarGuy. I will be answering questions for the next, I don't know, however long it takes. I will be taking the questions from a forum thread on my website, and that should be linked down in the description for you. I cannot see the comments being posted to YouTube as they're being posted, so I apologize for that in advance. But there's always resources at EricTheCarGuy.com, in particular the FAQ page, which answers the large majority of the questions that I get asked. So if I don't get to your question today, or if you need answers and I'm not doing one of these live shows, EricTheCarGuy.com is where to go. I will now move on to start answering those questions. Also, I sometimes butcher people's names. I don't mean to do that, so if I do that, I apologize for that in advance. Additionally, there is going to be links and things that I'll create and put in the description that go along with some of the things that we're likely to discuss during the course of this video. So if you have questions, please check the description first. There may be a link that'll lead you to an answer. So don't forget to check there. Now, on with the show. And this is an AMA show, so mostly I'm going to be answering automotive questions. However, I'm also taking on pretty much ask me anything kind of things within reason. Anywho, let's start with BPlat89. Hi Eric, hope all is well. I'm excited for the new Fairmont videos. Right there. My question is, I have a Silverado with a 5.7. I recently noticed the exhaust manifold gaskets are shot. From past experience, if you break one of these bolts off, well, you have a nightmare on your hands. I'm about 99% sure that the manifold bolts have never been out. Just by an overall glance, they look extremely rusty. What would you suggest replacing the gaskets, or would you think it would be just fine leaving it? I thought maybe using a torch would help things, but I don't really have access to one. Any advice is appreciated. Thank you for all you do, and stay dirty. Well, thank you. Let's see, you said it was a 97, so it has O2 sensors, which means any leaks before those O2 sensors are going to cause potential issues with performance. In other words, the O2 sensor is going to read lean because occasionally some air will sneak past that leak and go to the O2 sensor, and it may richen the mix as a result. Whenever there's leaks, particularly exhaust leaks, that could potentially get into the cabin, so say you leave it running outside in the wintertime and the heater's running, well, the heater gets its fresh air from just underneath where the windshield wipers are, so if you got an exhaust leak and things, that could possibly come into the cabin. Short answer is, if you were to have this vehicle inspected in a state that would inspect those types of things, it wouldn't pass that inspection. So to answer your question as far as should you fix it, you probably should. But you're also correct in the fact that with that much rust and in that situation that you're probably looking at a fight on your hands. I would recommend a torch. I know you say you didn't have access to one, but if you're going to tackle the job, I would say that's a really good thing to have, and that still may not be enough. I went through a similar thing with the Montana exhaust manifold bolts, and a lot of people suggested, other than the method that I use, which was to drill it out, actually take a nut and weld it onto the end of whatever piece is broken off inside the cylinder head and try to turn it out that way. In fact, the next time I run into that issue, that's what I'm going to attempt. But if you don't have access to a torch, you probably don't have access to that either. Therefore, I would say you probably should fix it, but until you get the tools that I feel would be necessary to pursue it, I wouldn't mess with it, because if you try, I imagine you're probably going to break things. And we're just talking about the studs going into the cylinder head. If you're going to replace the gasket, it's quite likely you're going to at least have to loosen the fasteners going to the downpipe as well. So that almost certainly would require a torch, at least in my experience. Whenever I'm doing exhaust work, the torch comes out. just no questions asked. That's just where I go. It's my go-to thing. It's the magic red wrench, or the big red wrench, as some call it, that help you in situations just like that. I'm also going to say before I go to the next question that during the last show, I inadvertently missed some of the questions that were posted, and I apologize for that. As I'm streaming with my computer, it kind of uses a lot of the computing power, and scrolling kind of is an issue, and I've done what I can to help minimize it and try to make it okay. And I also apologize for the audio issues in the last show. In fact, I'm monitoring the audio right now in an effort to try and prevent such things in the future. I try to pride myself in my productions, but I'm still working out this new live show setup, so apologies for all of that. Anyway, moving on to the next question. Bicycle, whoa. Hey Eric, thanks for the videos. Look forward to them every week. Thank you. Anyway, so I've been working on organic farms for a number of years. I'm 31. I'm considering going to a tech college to get a degree in diesel technology. I've spent some time working on vehicles and machinery, and I think that may be something I'd enjoy professionally. As you can imagine, working on farms is super tough financially and would love to actually earn a living wage. Being poor at my age really sucks. Well, you should try it 10 years after where you're at. I've been there. Don't get me wrong, I'm not all about the money, but it's definitely something to consider when approaching a possible new career. I enjoy jobs that are physical and dirty, and also I can't do an office! Exclamation points. Basically, I would like your thoughts on pursuing something along these lines, and if you think there's a future in it. Again, I've done stuff like oil changes on trucks, tractors, fuel lines, starter motors, etc. Never done anything like replaced a trans or split a tractor through. You think it's a wise choice to get a 1 to 2 year degree. Thanks, and keep doing what you do. I think diesel is an excellent choice. I've actually been advising people, I get this type of question quite a bit, and the people come to me that say they want to get into automotive, I actually try to steer them toward the diesel market. And there's a couple of reasons for this. The automotive market is, well, I don't know how to put this. It's not that there aren't any jobs, because there are plenty of jobs, but it's hard to find a good job, it seems. And one that you like, that has staying power, that helps keep you educated and well financed, if you will. Diesel's not so much. I mean, diesel is a growing industry right now in many different respects. And the diesel market, as far as being a technician, is different than the automotive in the sense that pretty much the world runs on diesel, whether people know it or not. Either it's a ship that's using a diesel engine to get product from one side of the globe to the other, and then it's a bunch of tractor trailers that take it wherever it needs to be as far as the end destination. So it's a massive industry, not to mention the construction industry, everything else, farming, as you already know. So there's a lot of opportunities in diesel right now, and the pay is, in my opinion, a lot better. The downside is that you may end up working like second or third shift to start out. Now you could work your way up from there, but the thing about diesel is, and the reason why I mentioned that everything goes back to diesel in one way or another, is that those vehicles need to be maintained and taken care of in a way that isn't necessarily pursued with automotive. In other words, people will invest in a service or something like that with their vehicles when it has to, it seems. Whereas the diesel market, it's a requirement, because your bottom line is dependent on the operation of that diesel fleet. So it's not like you have to go to a customer and say, hey, we need to do this expensive service for your vehicle to keep it going, and they would look at you like, why do I need to spend all that money on a service that's running fine now? That doesn't necessarily happen in the diesel market. They're like, okay, well, we need to get this done. I mean, these things are on schedules, regiments. So in other words, it's a lot easier to get those jobs and maintain those jobs because, as I said, they're important. So as far as my recommendation, heck yeah, go to school for diesel. I think that would be a very good option for you, and I hope it is, and I wish you luck. B-Cord123. I have a 2016 Accord that's due for brakes, squealing. Is there some reason I have to have Honda do it versus myself? Do they do anything that home mechanic cannot do? Also, in general, should I bother checking the rotor flatness or just do the pads since the car is so new? No wheel vibration during braking. By the way, lastly, OEM or manufacturer pads. Thanks, Eric. All right, excellent questions. I used to be a Honda technician, well, Acura technician myself. So, and I've also produced videos that show exactly what I would do as far as a brake job. So there is a brake video that I have that probably exactly describes exactly what you need to do. So do you need to take it to the dealer? No. I wouldn't advise taking your vehicle to the dealer for brakes unless you have a really good relationship with your dealer. It's going to be more expensive. And yes, they will use original equipment parts, and yes, it should be the best service that you can possibly get. However, it's for something like brakes, it should be well within the range of most shops. Now this comes down to the type of parts that they're going to use. Now the OE parts, well, you can't do much better, but there are aftermarket parts out there that are really great. I like Beck Arnley stuff. I really liked Akebono pads for Hondas and Toyotas and stuff, but I have a hard time finding them these days. But if you can find Akebono stuff, it's as good as the OE stuff in my opinion. And that video should be able to walk you through the process. Now, I'm coming back to this though. You say your brakes are squealing. That doesn't necessarily mean you need brakes. You need to do an inspection to verify that. It could mean any number of things. It could just mean that they need to be serviced, and I also have videos on that. So in other words, don't jump the gun and say that you know you need pads until you've actually taken off the wheel and disassembled the brakes and physically looked at the pads. In other words, take the caliper off, take a look and see what you have and make sure that they're worn out. There could be other things that are causing that noise. So don't go in with the assumption that just because you have a brake noise that you need brakes. Could be something else. Could be a piece of debris stuck between the pads. It could be that they're just in need of service, because they do need to be serviced from time to time. And I'll put links in the description to both of those videos so that you can look at them and use them. And I think I've also in there answered the question of whether or not you should go for OE or aftermarket pads. But the number one cause of brake noise, at least in my experience, has been the pad material used. So in other words, if you go on the cheap side when you buy those pads, it's a good bet that they'll probably be noisy down the road, no matter how much glue you try to slap on the back of them, which I don't recommend. We've got a regular. Our Schwieber, I can't say it, but anyway, he's got this 1961 Land Rover. Hey Eric, how you doing? I've got a question and one AMA. You've got a way of trying to sneak in multiple questions, don't you? Well, it seems we have time today so far because there haven't been a whole lot of questions posted to the thread as of this time. I've only been driving my 61 Land Rover for a little while, but I suspect it might be guzzling fuel pretty bad. Any tips for finding efficiency problems in old carbureted engines? I'm certain vacuum leaks are not the issue, but I think the engine may be heavily carbonized. Exhaust leaks? My understanding is that they can mess with the fuel ratio, and my muffler did look like Swiss cheese until it fell off the other day. Anyways, any thoughts would be appreciated. Well, it just so happens I have a video on rebuilding a carburetor. So if you're asking about what to do with a carburetor, you rebuild all the stuff that you need, a lot of things. So in other words, don't consider it a daunting task, but a good cleaning and a good servicing of the carburetor, such as replacing like the accelerator pump and any other rubber components and gaskets inside of it that could possibly be a problem, is a great way to go. As far as decarbonizing the engine, I've also done a video on that. All you need is a glass of water. So that carbonization I don't think is really going to affect the way it runs so much, but the carburetor will affect it a great deal. And I also have a video on how to find vacuum leaks. So there are lots of options there, but if it were me, first thing I'd do with an old carburetor is rebuild it. I like rebuilding carburetors. It's just how I am, but like I said, I don't think they're that difficult, and I do have a two-part video on rebuilding carburetors. It is a Ford carburetor. It's not your Land Rover carburetor, but carburetors pretty much work the same with a few little quirks thrown in as per manufacturer. And many times it's a question of there are certain companies that make carburetors. In other words, Land Rover likely didn't make that carburetor. They bought it from somewhere. So a company that all they did was make carburetors. So they bought a whole bunch of those carburetors and they put them on their engines. So it's likely that it's on more than just that vehicle. Now on to your other question. Now I want to start making YouTube videos, and I was wondering if you had any tips or guidelines on how to film or edit your videos. I've already shot quite a bit of footage while doing stuff on the Land Rover and produced a couple on YouTube. But you've been doing it a lot longer than I have, and I was wondering if you had any wisdom to pass on. that might actually make a good ETCG1 video behind the scenes of how Eric the Car Guy is produced and how you built the ETCG empire in the first place. Anyways, thanks for your help. Here's another name for you to try, Kozlowski. I have less trouble with that one for some reason. Actually, there has been 2 ETCG1 videos, one on ETCG production and one on ETCG post-production. Now that's my old setup and the way I used to do things. However, just last year I did a presentation at SEMA. It's about 45-ish minutes long that covers exactly what you're asking. I talk about how I got where I am, I talk about YouTube, I talk about social media and how all those things go to camera techniques, audio stuff, all this kind of thing. And it just so happens I recorded that and it is available as a premium member video on the very site that you posted your question to. So if you really want to, you can sign up for a premium membership and watch that video. And it's been on there for about a year, so I'm not clickbaiting or nothing like that, but I mean, I have produced a video on that very thing. And in fact, Brian and I just the other week shot a video about what we do to prepare for a shoot and how we get everything together. That's also coming to the premium member videos here in the future. So those of you out there are like, oh, you're YouTube, blah, blah, blah. I put 2 shows a week on YouTube. So actually I put out 3 shows a week on YouTube. So yeah, you actually get the bulk of what I do anyway. But if you want the special stuff, the stuff that's not always seen there, I do have over 200 videos in my premium member library. Sky Austin 01. Hey Eric, I have a 1988 C1500 with a 305 5-liter engine. The issue I'm having is that there is a hesitation from the motor in light throttle to part throttle conditions. It seems that this situation is worse when the engine is cold. It also likes the gasoline. I am getting 13 miles per gallon highway, driving like an old lady. Things that I have replaced, brake cylinders and calipers all the way around, and new pads and shoes to eliminate the drag issue that needed to be replaced. Air cleaner, temp sensor, O2 sensor. The motor picked up a little bit with the new O2 sensor, but there's still a little issue with hesitation at part or light throttle. Any help would be appreciated. As always, be safe, have fun, and stay dirty. Okay, cool truck. In fact, well, I'm not gonna talk about that quite yet. Anyway, if I'm not mistaken, let's see, in '88, I'm trying to think if they had, I believe they did use the throttle body injection at that time. So I think you might have a throttle body injected V8 there. Memory serves, there's a couple of things with that setup that were having issues, and the injectors themselves the spray pad on them can get kind of crappy. And the way to check it, and this is actually kind of fun to do, and let's see, take a timing light and put it on the coil wire, if I remember right. Take the air cleaner off and you can actually run the timing light and point it, or maybe it's just number 1 cylinder, I can't remember. Well, try it on the coil wire first, and if it doesn't work with that, try it on one of the other ones. But basically you can point it at the spray pattern of the injectors, and it like a strobe light, it will freeze it in place. So in other words, you can kind of take a snapshot and you can see the spray pattern coming out of those injectors. And it should be a nice cone that's coming down. It shouldn't be dripping or dribbling or any of that kind of stuff. If it is, this could be the source of your problem. Since you're not able to, it's not OBD2, you're not really able to look on a scan tool at, like, say, the TPS, which could have a problem, but you can back probe it with it disconnected and check its resistance perhaps, and run it through its sweep and see if you see any bumps in resistance. A lab scope would be ideal for that, if I'm honest, because then you could just actually see the graph as the throttle position sensor is running. Because think of a throttle position sensor. Give me a second here. I'm just gonna. A throttle position sensor is like a volume knob on the stereo, and if there's any little blips in its travel, in other words, if there's like a dip or something like that, it can cause, instead of like turning up the volume, it turns up the fuel. So if there's like a dead spot in it, it can drop off. And those older TPS sensors weren't as good as what we make today. And also it's just plain older, so there could be something going on there. And you also didn't mention anything about an ignition tune-up, which could also contribute. So if your plugs, wires, cap, and rotor, and that stuff's all old, probably not a bad idea to address that as well. But the little trick with a timing belt should give you a clue as to what your spray pattern is. And if it's not looking so good, you might want to try some fuel injection cleaner to see if that can help. Now, I'm only going to mention this because I know about it, but I don't remember the specifics on it because it was so many years ago. But I do remember something about GM throttle body systems and soldering in a resistor that would help even out the current humps with them, because for some reason, they weren't performing well. I don't remember. I really have to dig up that article, because I mean, we're talking ancient history. This was 20 some years ago that I remember seeing this little trick. But it had something to do with putting a resistor on the back of one of those TVI injectors, and it would smooth it out quite a bit, because every time the injector closes, it causes sort of a backfeed of voltage through the system, and I think it had something to do with helping to limit that. And I think they do it electronically now. I think it's a current limiting hump. Scanner Danner, he would be the guy to answer on that. But I'll also refer you to the performance section here on the website. So if you go over the FAQ page, you can look through the engine performance section, and you may find some other information and videos there that may also be helpful. G. Johns 1. Greetings from Utah, Eric. Love the show and all the great info you've given us. Keep up the good work. Thank you for that. I currently drive an 06 Tundra and 2013 Sonata, both of which have sealed transmissions. What is your take on sealed transmissions, and what maintenance tips would you give those of us without a dipstick? Dirty is as dirty does. I like that. I've actually done an ETCG 1 video on this too. It's called Non-Serviceable Components, and we talked about transmissions of this type. And it seems that manufacturers are moving more and more towards this. And part of the reason, I think, is because they don't want you messing with it. You being the end consumer. They only want a qualified technician, because they made really super special transmissions and really super special fluid to go with them. Okay, but that being said, if there's nothing listed in a service for them, don't do anything to it, because you could actually cause more harm than good in a lot of ways. Although the 06 may not be as sealed as you think. You might want to check out, and I'll link it in the description, the video that I did about changing transmission fluid, and I think it was an 05 Tundra, and it's a procedure that you have to go through. There is no dipstick. But there is a whole other method that you can go through to change the fluid in there, and I cover that in that video, so that may be helpful to you. So I'll dig that up and link it down in the description of the video, and hopefully that can point you in the direction there. But once again, definitely follow manufacturer recommendations on that, and if they say don't do it, then don't do it. As far as the Sonata, I'm not sure. 2013, it's hard to say. That may be a similar situation. But if you're unable to find information about how to change it, then I would say leave it. And especially if the owner's manual says don't worry about your transmission, you're kind of stuck on that one. And I do talk about that in that video as well. Let's see, Mercedes 300 SEL, fancy. Greetings from Denmark, Eric. In Denmark, it's mandatory to have daytime running lights. My car was imported and did not have this feature from the factory. I would like to add it because I'm tired of turning all the lights on all day long. I want to wire a relay to make the low beams come on when the car is running, but also I wanted to switch them off and turn on the parking lights from the light switch. I've searched a lot. I've read about how the 4/5 pin relays work, and quite frankly, what's confusing me is how to make the low beams turn off when the parking lights is turned on from the light switch. And it's a 1996 Mercedes-Benz S3200. Or no, I'm sorry, S320. Apologies for that. Any info is appreciated. Well, I did some Google searching about this, because I was like, I wonder if that vehicle, at least in some trim level, had daytime running lights, and it turns out that it did. So even though your vehicle is imported, I found out that the Mercedes that went into the Canadian market came through the US, and in the Canadian market, it's required that they run DRLs. So they added a module from Mercedes in there that made that happen. If I were you, I wouldn't go through all this difficult stuff. I'd seek out one of those daytime running light modules and install that on the vehicle, because that would be the easiest way to do what you want to do, rather than trying to jerry rig it up the way you want. But there is available, and I did look, and I'll link it down in the description for you, of the information that I found that there is a DRL module out there for your vehicle. You just have to track one down and install it, and you'll have your DRLs. That's what I would do. Try to keep it easy. Always try to keep it easy. Aaron Tripp 316 has a 1990 Cadillac 4.5 and it says to use premium fuel only. I've had it for 3 years and never put in premium. Always regular. I've also never noticed anything change in any way in the way it runs or drives. I've seen your video about the different octane ratings and why they're different, but my question is, are there any side effects that result from using regular where premium is called for? If so, why haven't I noticed any? Well, you probably never got full power out of it. And I might have mentioned in that video, it's quite some time since I posted that one, about if you do run lower octane fuel. Well, for those of you that haven't seen the video, which I will do my best to link down in the description, it's that the reason you want the higher octane fuel is usually with higher compression engines or forced induction. In other words, there's higher cylinder pressures and temperatures that could cause the fuel to ignite before the spark plug tells it to. So you run a higher octane fuel to help prevent this, and a higher octane actually has a resistance to burning. So in other words, it resists that extreme heat and temperature and waits for the spark plug to tell it to ignite. So the higher the octane, the more it does this. Now, newer vehicle systems are designed to detect if there is detonation or pre-ignition happening inside of the combustion chamber, and it will retard the timing until it stops seeing that. That's what NOx sensors are for. NOx sensors are there to basically listen to the engine, and if it detects any abnormal signals coming from the engine that would indicate any of those things that could be potentially damaging to the engine, it backs the timing off. So in other words, when I say you're not getting full power, as you're potentially not getting full power is exactly that. So in other words, the engine is in a self-preservation mode, and as a result, you can run that lower octane fuel, but it won't run as good. So as far as long-term effects, hard to say. Believe it or not, in my Acura Vigor, my 93 Vigor, as junky as that thing looks, it takes premium fuel, and I put premium fuel in it. I don't put a lot of miles on it, but still, premium fuel is what I've always used in it because that's what it's called for, and I'm very happy with the way it runs. But if you're happy with the way your Cadillac runs and you're not experiencing any adverse effect that you can tell, go ahead. But on some vehicles really don't like it. So it's kind of vehicle specific. But if you're happy, hey, go for it. All right, Gary Pro 43. Hello, Eric. Just turned 16 and I'm looking for a good first car. I'm thinking about something that's mechanically forgiving considering that I haven't so much as loosened a bolt in my life. Although I do have a good general idea of how things work in a car and there's a bit of flexibility there. However, I'm not looking for an average Civic or Corolla, but instead for something that stands out among the crowd, preferably something that's also relatively common and easy on the wallet. What do you personally recommend, and do you think I should go for a manual or automatic transmission? You know, that's kind of a tall order because it's sort of self-contradictory if you actually think about it. You don't want it to stand out from the crowd, but you want it to be cheap and easy to operate. Those two things don't kind of go together, and I hope you see that. But that's okay, you're young and forgiven. Anyway, to answer your question, I really hate answering this question because it's probably one of the most popular questions I get asked. What car should I buy? And the answer I always give is whatever car you like, except have it checked out before you buy it. In other words, have somebody look it over and assess its mechanical condition before you put your money out. And the reason is that helps protect your investment, and preferably somebody who's familiar with the brand of vehicle that you're looking to buy. So in other words, a general practitioner, say in a shop who works on everything, may not necessarily know about whatever service bulletin or something like that may be involved with a vehicle that you're looking at, and they can look at it and say, yeah, it was done or it wasn't done, or this is a common problem on this vehicle. So in other people familiar with that vehicle would be the best qualified to look it over. I have an entire section on this website about inspecting a used vehicle. In fact, there's a 4-part video series that I also did with it to help guide you through the process of purchasing a used vehicle. Everything from looking at the exterior, checking out the engine, checking the fluids, taking it for a test drive. Everything. I tried to cover every aspect And that's basically the default answer I have to your question. And that is, you know, if you are looking to purchase something, I strongly advise that you have somebody look it over first. But you're gonna find something you fall in love with and figure it out. As far as manual or automatic, once again, that's up to you. I know what my preferences are, and I have both. I have manuals, I have automatics. I have a mixed bag of things because, you know, I'm a car guy. It's in the name. Now let's see. I'm hoping that's not all the questions that we have here today, because that was the last one that was up. And we're right at a half hour, which hasn't happened in a very long time. So we'll see. I just refreshed the page. We'll see if we've had some new posters of questions since I started the show. And the answer is, heck yeah, there's 2 other pages yet. Eric, get to answering. So far, it's like a half-hour page. You need to move it along if you want to answer everybody's questions. And I do try to answer as many of these as I possibly can. All right, Supercar 14. Hey, Eric, a few quick questions for you. 1, I'm shopping around for an engine support bar. I remember you mentioning one in a video, but don't remember which one it was. Do you have any recommendations for what I should look for? 2, how can you check to see if a timing belt needs to be replaced? The car in question is past when the manual says it needs to be done, the belt needs to be replaced, but it looks new, and the owners, my in-laws, don't have a clue if it's ever been replaced. And here's an AMA. Have you ever played World of Warcraft, and what is your favorite car other than Oliver? All right, we're going to get to your 2-part first question. It's actually 3 questions, but I'll allow it. Shopping around for an engine support bar. Just so happens I have mine here. I actually got this from Harbor Freight. So US General, works fine, has worked fine. The differences in these mostly come with this part over here and how they mount up, and some of them have a 3rd support that comes out the front that can also be useful. I suppose it really depends on what vehicle you're working on. This allows me to pull transmissions out of Honda Odysseys, and that's mainly what I used it for, and a few other things, so it's worked fine for me. And it's also affordably priced, let's put it that way. Set this down. So what I like about doing these videos at the shop is that I can just grab things whenever I want to, which is kind of nice. But anyway, so as far as timing belt replacement goes, there really is no hard and fast rule for that. You pretty much have to put your eyeballs on it. In my experience, timing belts, it kind of depends on the manufacturer. Like Toyotas seem to be really sensitive about it. So Toyotas, like if you go like 5,000 miles past when it was due, for some reason they tend to break. And they don't necessarily break so much as shear the teeth off. So it's hard to look at a belt and see that that's about to happen. So if a customer comes to me and they just bought a car and they're looking to figure it out, I pretty much almost always sell them a timing belt, because by the time I get through and take everything apart to inspect the belt, you know, most times you might as well just replace it anyway. Sometimes you can look at the water pump and you can see like maybe a little bit of coolant coming out of the weep hole, because many times timing belts and water pumps are replaced as a set. So in other words, if the water pump is older and leaking, then most certainly, you know, especially if it's driven by the timing belt. So it's a real good idea to replace that at the same time. Sometimes you can tell by the drive belts. I always replace drive belts when I do a timing belt. I have to take them off to get there anyway. I see no point in putting old drive belts back on an engine. So in other words, if the drive belts are all dry rotted and cracked, that could be a good indication. It really depends on the vehicle, if I'm honest. And if it is in question and you're worried, well, eliminate the worry by replacing it, is what I say. As far as World of Warcraft, no, I never got into World of Warcraft. I was Call of Duty, I was Borderlands. I played copious amounts of Borderlands. I flippin' loved that game. But no, not World of Warcraft. And as far as favorite car, well, to me, like you said, other than Oliver, probably, you know, the one I drive the most right now is my Acura Vigor. I love that car. I even did a video about how much I love that car. I love it because You know, if I'm in a parking lot, somebody hits it with a shopping cart, so what? Nobody pays attention to it. I even came back. I flew in from, I can't remember where it was, but anyway, I parked it in long-term parking. I call it my airport car. It's parked in long-term parking. It's a perfect thing to park in long-term parking. Anyway, the guy drops me off and he's like, dude, you need a new car. And I'm like, you have no idea what you're talking about, because this is perfect just the way it is. So as far as the one I'm driving, it's my Acura Vigor, aside from Oliver. But I hope Oliver's done relatively soon, because I'd just love to hear that V8 rub roll and that turbo whistle. That would be just so much fun. Moving on, we have lots of questions. Fry hole, I like that. As a 1994 Honda Accord SE, I've recently had the valve cover gasket and head gasket replaced after discovering oil in the coolant reservoir tank. The car used to have overheating problems. The mechanic that replaced the gaskets had to have the head machined. Ever since I got the car back, it seems to run hot. It reaches 3/4 towards hot while driving 80-ish in 80ish degree weather. Any idle is at 3/4 or sometimes more. This sort of scares me, considering I have had overheating issues before. Is this something normal after having a head machined? If not, what should I be looking at? I also have an IR thermometer that I can use to see the temps going in and out of the thermostat, and it seems to be opening with operating temp. The temp should be, what temp should I be looking for at the hose? Also, the car intermittently revs once or twice at idle when I come to a stop and put it into park. This frustrates me to no end. And that's because that engine hardly ever has a problem with head gaskets. They switched to steel head gaskets, and steel head gaskets you have to have a warped head in order for that to like really have a problem. And in fact, I did a video called Don't Make My Life More Difficult, and I believe it's on ETCG 1, and it was on an Accord of this vintage that somebody had put in stop leak and done some other kind of junk to it. I ended up going in, taking the head gasket out, and just seeing work that sucked. Number one thing to check with an overheat condition, especially on a Honda, air in the cooling system. Number one thing to check for an overheat issue after servicing something like this, opening up the cooling system, air in the cooling system. I can't say it enough. If you look at the overheat section on this very website, over and over and over again it says that. And guess what else it affects? Idle. And you got an idle problem and you got an overheat problem. Never properly serviced, never properly bled out. I've done a video on it. It's all covered in the overheat section of this website. Super frustrating when I hear that, because I've had this information out for years, but of course you might not have seen it then or whatever. But before you go replacing head gaskets on these freaking cars, especially the Accords, check for air in the cooling system, because that is super common. Super common to have air in the cooling system. So whole section for you on overheats, another whole section on idles. Both of them start with check for air in the cooling system. Both of them. As far as water and oil mixing, that could also be some Accords, and that one might have it, an oil cooler. So underneath the oil filter, there's an oil cooler. I've seen those go bad sometimes and put coolant into the oil. Got nothing to do with the head gasket, super easy to replace. It's proper diagnosis is where this starts. You've got to verify that there's a head gasket problem. Also covered in the overheat video. So there's a chemical way to do it that's not that difficult to find out if you've got combustion gases in your cooling system. So I always get frustrated when I hear people putting head gaskets on Accords, because in my experience, 9 times out of 10, that's not the problem. But it pays good money and it's really not that difficult to do. But if you screw it up, you screw it up. BKLord123, BCord123, weren't you, hey, I've seen you ask a question before. Anyway, will the internet ever get good enough that your voice and video are in sync? I can't believe that's not possible in 2016. Really? Moving on. Mike1313, hey Eric, I was wondering, is it a good idea to wash the engine bay even if I take the precautions of covering all the sensitive electronics and use regular water instead of hose pressure? I've been asked about a washing engine video, especially. It really rubs people the wrong way that the engine compartment on my Integra, my GSR, is dirty. That just, they cannot that just can't compute. There's just like, oh, dirt, oh, it's bad. I understand OCD. I have it myself. I get it, okay? But I resign my OCD-ness to the inside of the engine. I could care less what the outside looks like, because the inside, if that's clean, that's going to get me somewhere. If the outside's dirty, so what? Okay, I'll say this about washing engines, and actually the GSR is probably a great candidate to do a video on engine washing on. Okay, I'll give you that, and it's a valid question, and it's out there. I just have issue with it, and this is why. Working at the dealership, we would have a car wash section, and we also had a detail department. That was actually a separate company or whatever, and occasionally they would decide to wash the engine bays, especially if they were going to put out used cars or something like that. The success rate of them actually successfully doing this without causing an electrical problem after the fact, I would say, is somewhere around 55%. So I'm saying there's like a 50-50 chance you could screw it up and cause a problem. I mean, obviously stay away from the electronics and don't linger on them. Pressure washing is probably not as good of an idea, although that's probably the direction that I'll go. Just because I want to see. I want to see if I can screw it up, because if I could screw it up on camera, I could possibly deter some people from doing it. But then again, I get it. I mean, you know, it's easier to work on, it's cleaner, all that kind of thing. Some people are really into a clean engine compartment. That's okay. You know, I don't fault you for that. I'm not like that. So, in other words, I'm not going to yell at you like you yell at me for having a dirty engine bay. How's that? It's a two-way street. But, you know, like I said, it's about a 50-50 chance of whether or not you're gonna do it. So be careful. Looks like rain. Hey Eric, thanks for the videos you do. I have a longer question. I've been trying to track down an issue on my father's truck, 1998 Chevy K1500. We have a couple of those today. 5.7 Vortec 4L60E, 153,000 miles. It feels like intermittent torque converter lockup in second and third gear. I had a P0740 torque converter clutch circuit malfunction. We replaced the torque converter clutch solenoid as it was bad. Resistance was out of spec. After replacement, the check engine light went out, but the symptoms still exist. We also checked the resistance of the wiring harness, and all that was inspected. And isn't shorted out and no visible damage. Could it be the transmission control module or potentially a mechanically failing transmission? You got it on the last one. And I suspect that that's probably been the problem all along, because GMs are kind of famous for this. There is, going into the torque converter, the input shaft of the transmission, there's an O-ring on the end of it. That O-ring helps seal the pressure inside the torque converter. If that O-ring goes bad, then what'll happen is intermittent engagement, because the fluid pressure keeps leaking past that seal. Now the way to verify this is to put a transmission pressure gauge on the proper port on the outside of the transmission and run it and find out. Your best bet is probably to take it to a transmission shop and pay for a diagnostic just to find out. Or you can bite the bullet and swap the transmission out. And that really depends on you and how deep down that rabbit hole you want to go. But the other thing is I don't believe that the torque converter locks up in every gear. Usually torque converter lockup, especially on older vehicles like that, doesn't happen until your highway speeds. So in other words, it goes into fourth gear, and then after fourth gear there's like another shift, and it activates the torque converter. That's usually the way it worked, like back in the day. Like newer systems, yes, they lock up the torque converter between shifts and to help minimize losses through the transmission, but in 98 we weren't quite there yet, especially on trucks. So that may not be the problem. You may have some other issue similar to what I just described. May also be an O-ring, but another O-ring inside the transmission that's causing that intermittent engagement of that gear. So in order to know what's really going on there, obviously check the fluid level and condition. If you see a bunch of air bubbles inside the fluid, well, it could be, you could possibly change the filter, and sometimes a filter will cause aeration, but an automatic transmission is a hydraulic system. Therefore, if there's any air in the system or any leaks in the system, it's not going to be able to function properly. And the people at a transmission shop are going to be the best equipped to make that diagnosis. And then you can decide from there how you wish to move forward, proceed, what have you. Skip77. Hey Eric, Skip from Delaware. Keep doing it, brother. Hey Skip. Thanks for the shout out, man. Dan428. Hey Eric, my Infiniti G37 has started to have uneven idle, especially when cold. and even stalled intermittently after starting a couple of times after a short drive. It might be a minor issue, but what are the most likely causes for this? There is no engine warning light showing. Okay, Infiniti G37, which would be a later model one, I think. Off the top of my head, uneven idle, specifically when cold. I would check to see if there are any holes in the tube that goes from the mass airflow sensor to the engine. If there is, the Nissan Sentra a while back that I did for fixing it forward, that had that. And that can cause definite issues like stalling and problems that you're having, and may not turn on a check engine light because the mass airflow sensor, it's after the mass airflow sensor, so it doesn't know that the air is coming in from elsewhere and possibly causing an issue. So in other words, it might be drawing in too much air and not have enough fuel to go with that air, therefore it stalls. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. Outside of that, check the tune-up stuff, general tune-up stuff. Check the performance diagnostics section of this website, and that could possibly also help you. But it's hard to say on that one. But I think the first thing I would check for is those air leaks. Mike1313, hey Eric, is it a good idea to clean the engine bay, even if I take the appropriate, hey, didn't you just post that? All right, I just answered that question. I'm gonna move on. Jotmon1, hey Eric, I've been working on a P171-174, lean both banks on a 2000 GMC 5.7 liter Vortec for some time now. Fact is, the miles per gallon are down from 16 to 13, runs okay, but the fuel trim show around 7 to 10 on both banks at idle, then goes up under load. New fuel pump and regulator under local driving, the CEL stays off, but under heavy loads it comes on. Any ideas of what to check for in what order? Lean condition. Well, we talked earlier about possible exhaust leaks can cause that. Also vacuum leaks, and I have a video on how to find vacuum leaks that could also be useful to you. But I wouldn't go for the O2 sensors right out of the gate on that one. I'd put them down at the bottom of the list. I can't remember if you had replaced them or not. It doesn't look like you have. But exhaust leaks definitely could be a problem in it. And I think that that's a common problem on that engine, that you would have like the manifold leaks like we talked about earlier. That could be an issue, but it says it's running lean. So in other words, it's like vacuum leak or possibly exhaust leak that's telling it that. Down, like I say, at the bottom of the list, it could be an O2 sensor malfunctioning, but both banks, I'm not feeling that. That could also be a fuel delivery problem. You might want to check fuel pressure just to be on the safe side, but you did say, I think, that you replaced the fuel pump. Yeah, new fuel pump and regulator. So you got the fuel system pretty much covered according to what you're seeing there, other than possibly an injector that might not be working. You might try a power balance test, and that's disconnecting each one of the spark plug wires one by one to check to see if there's an RPM drop. There should be an RPM drop with each cylinder that you disable. If there isn't one, that could be a cylinder that's not contributing. Could also contribute to a lean condition. Performance section, once again, that I'll refer you to, but that's kind of where I would start going with it. And it's a 2000 if it runs a mass airflow sensor. It could be a mass airflow sensor issue. You might try cleaning that. There is mass airflow sensor cleaner that you can use. And also check for any leaks between that sensor and the engine. That could also cause that lean condition. So there's something else to check. So there's a list for you. Hope that's helpful. EricTheCarGuy. Hey Eric, love the videos. You've helped me a ton. Now I have a 2012 Taurus SHO that I replaced the brakes on recently, and more recently did a full brake flush system using OEM fluid in a suction type system. I went in the correct wheel order and waited till the fluid came out clear. Now, after the change, the brakes are just spongy, if not more so. They've gotten a bit harder after 5 to 10 minutes, but not awesome like they should be. What could be wrong, and do I need to redo the brake flush? Yeah, it kind of sucks when you're doing something that you think is going to make it better and you make it worse. I get it. What I would try, and I've done a video on this, find yourself a parking lot with nobody in it, or very, very few people in it. Get up going as fast as you can and jam on the brakes. Do that like 3 or 4 times and see if the pedal gets better. I call it resetting the master cylinder, but it also activates the ABS oftentimes, and if there's air in the ABS, it can possibly bleed that out. I'm not sure. I know GM vehicles do have a situation where you do have to use a scan tool to bleed everything out to make sure that everything's bled out of the ABS system on later models, not the older ones. But on later models, yeah, that was an issue. I'm not sure if that's the case with newer Fords, however. But the first thing I would try, the easiest and simplest thing, is the parking lot jamming on the brake. And be careful and obviously be responsible for this. But give that a try and see if the brake pedal doesn't come up for you a little bit. Because I've had a lot of success with that method. And especially with four-wheel disc brake cars, for whatever reason, four-wheel disc brake cars seem to be habitually bad with that kind of stuff. Wow, we've gotten a lot more questions. Although I'm going to have to wrap this up because we're getting to the end. But yeah, a lot of you posted questions during the show. So how about we make the last question random and just sort of do that and see where we end up. All right, something's broken. Hey Eric, I've got a 1998 Nissan Altima that I just bought and that had a broken timing chain. After replacing the chain and getting it back up on its feet, I'm having a bunch of electrical problems. Accessories such as turn signals, but emergency flashers work, horns, gauges, power windows, power mirrors, etc. What would be the first step in fixing these? I've watched your video on electrical basics, but I'm still stumped. I've checked all the fuses and can find the battery is brand new, putting out 12.5 volts. Any ideas? So I'm a little confused. You replace the timing chain, and now you got a bunch of electrical problems. Accessories such as turn signals, but emergency flashers work. Those are on two separate circuits. Horn, gauges, power windows, power mirrors, etc. You know, given that you just went into the timing chain, I'd check to see if you left an engine ground off. That's the first thing that comes to mind with that. So if you bought it with a broken timing chain, so it could have had the problem beforehand, but there should be a ground that goes between the body and the engine block, and sometimes more than one. But if you did that job and you forgot to put that ground connection in there, that could be the cause. But it affects like so many systems, you know, that aren't necessarily related. So yeah, I would be looking at body grounds. And also maybe even the main ground coming off of the battery. Just be sure that that's attached to the engine block. That seems like a good, healthy place to start. And with that, I'm going to close this out. And thank you for watching, number one. Give me a few minutes to get those links and things together because I have to go through all this stuff and remember what I talked about and remember what links I want to add. So I'll be here for a good half hour or so, but I'll try to put all that together for you. Additionally, if I didn't get to your question, I want to apologize. I will be doing this again in 2 weeks. I don't remember the exact date. It might have been like the 26th or 28th, but I will announce it on the day. So keep an eye on my social networks for that, particularly Facebook, Instagram. I also put it on Google+. So those are the social networks that I put the announcement on first thing in the morning. Outside of that, EricTheCarGuy.com is always available to you. And this forum that I've been reading these questions from, you can also post to our service and repair section if you have questions that I didn't get covered here, if you have specific questions. But before you go there, you might try the FAQ, the troubleshooting FAQ page, because as I said, so much of the questions that I get asked are covered there. Outside of that, it's really a question of, I don't know, the thing that I say at the end of all my videos, which is first, once again, I want to thank you for watching, and then it's be safe, have fun, and stay dirty. I will see you next time after this cool fade out.